Good morning. We're awaiting the start of a special board meeting this Saturday morning of the Acton Agua Dulce Unified School District. They are having a governance workshop in respect to charters and the changes with the charters, the revenue that districts can charge when they sponsor. There's a bill, an AB bill that came out in the last year and a half or so that has changed the way it looks to sponsor charters for different districts. And they are going to have a workshop today, as I mentioned, over a span of 5 hours. And they are going to discuss, I would presume, how this is going to look moving forward. So this is going to be a workshop type of a meeting, not a regular meeting. So with that being said, I will videotape the parts that I feel are the highlights. I'm hoping to catch the highlights because I will not videotape 5 hours. That's too much for our viewers and our readers to see. But I am here for the 5 hours and will hopefully catch all the highlights. And we'll see what this is about today.
The directions that you said. The next one is, and this is super important, you establish the budget to align with the goals. Now you're having to do some, really some figuring out on that one because you really know your priorities in the district by looking at the budget. And so you have to, your responsibility to all the struggles that you're making right now in terms of personnel, so forth, those are, you need good staff recommendations, but they fall to you, and you're feeling the weight of that, I'd say. And then the staff gets to working. They get to work. Larry's working with the HR and the cabinet folks and the principals and the teachers and the departments. Like, how do we get the board's priorities into place? And then the monitors, and this part doesn't always happen as well as it could. It's the superintendent's responsibility to come back to the board and say, you said you wanted this, 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 and this, and these are measurables, and then how are we moving toward that? And I always say, it's not, you said this, we accomplished it. You said this, we started here, we got to here, and now we get to here, now we get here. I mean, Kelly, in your business, is that like, this is a work in progress. I mean, not always, let's build a school, we finish the school. Okay, fine. But on these things that you're doing, what progress is made? And you don't even know until you have good baseline data, do you? Where did we start? Where are we now? And then, and part of what Ms. Payne's going to do is talk about that.
If I may jump in really quick, I think it's important too, because you're seeing that side of the fence of the board and the strategic plan, the gold standards. That was something that was really important to me, but I think it's more important. That's what I said I wanted to happen here. Part of that is for clarity and having common purpose and common goals. But I think it's important to say that we did not just make the gold standard here. Ken mentioned it earlier. And so I don't want to give the visual that we just on our own came up with the gold standard. It was lots of stakeholders and things like that. Part of that purpose is because you want to hear from your community what they want for their schools, and that's how we developed that plan. It wasn't this board made the goal. So I just, because of the visual, it's great, but I just want to have some clarity that we did not just come up with that. We said we wanted a standard. We wanted to have those goals of common purpose so everybody knows what the organization needs to accomplish together. But we didn't just come up with that on our.
So the most objective, engaged, and mature people in the community as groups came forward to input to that plan. That's a fact.
So good that you bring that up. You initiated it. You directed it. You approved it. But boy, I know you adopted it. The whole community was engaged in that process. You were engaged like an accordion. It went down, it came back. It went down, it came back. And so thank you for
and talking about being, transparent and stuff. you know, we could have written the goals, we probably could have, but we did, that's not the purpose. We want to hear what our community wants for their children and what the schools look like.
Right.
So I think that's important to mention.
Yeah, that's so good. Mr. King was, I mean, the process you went through with staff at the board's direction was enormous. So, yeah, that's good. The visual doesn't depict the reality. You set the wheels in motion, you proved it, you were engaged in it, but you involved people. And then the final, and then we're gonna have a little exercise, but the final is, then the board's responsibility is you know, you hold people accountable, which is really superintendent, you evaluate the superintendent, and then cycle, you know, continues like that. This fence sometimes isn't exactly right because it seems like there's a blockage. It's not blockage because there's gray area. You kind of come back and forth. It's almost like a wavy line. So there isn't like, because you're involved in some of the initiatives and the direction process, and so good organizations are engaged in it. But it basically is an understanding of, there's clear understanding of who's responsible for that, for getting it started. And so what I wanted to ask you a question of it, and I want to be conscious of time. I'd like to just get a sense from you, if you want to just spend a moment talking amongst yourself, because you know, where do you think you are as an organization? Is there an area up there that you think you do a good job with it? And it's an area to say, not that you're not doing a good job, but hey, we should be thinking about spending a little bit more time on this, or as an organization we can do a little better. So I'm going to turn, just ask you, Kelly, because I'm looking at our time, but is it worthy for the board that we keep kind of a talk on things just to see where people think maybe a strong area or an area that we could grow in?
I think we could all take a minute just to say what area we'd like to grow in. It'd be interesting to see if we match. What do you guys think?
Here's where I think we're strong. I think we've come a really long ways at the individual sites, and having the parent group who their goal is to support the school, support the kids. A lot of it used to be catering things, bringing in cookies and stuff, but it's bigger than that because in this superintendent's world, he has a monthly meeting with those people. They have their own meetings, and then people can input to that meeting, and I go to some of them because I'm a member of all of them. But great stuff comes out, and then there's some stuff that's kind of edgy. And the edgy stuff is what is kind of brewing in the community. And it's being presented in a way that says, hey, if you're the principal, maybe you can pay attention to this. But Larry meets with these people once a month. So there is a means of positively advocating for something that's affecting a lot of students or celebrating success. And the principals know he's going to hear about it. And then it gets back to cabinet. So I think we've done really, really good about that. I think where we're weak is I think sometimes we take on the model of, well, what's AV doing? Well, they got 20,000 kids in their school, or 50,000. And so right now in COVID, I see it in my own organization, nobody wants to get the lead because I'm going to alienate all the other superintendents. I'm going to wonder if my little school district is a testing ground for a regional employee association. There's all those kinds of things. So we're kind of getting in the habit of regurgitating the frustration and pointing the finger up at someone who really has never had anything to do with education, which is the departments of health and stuff. So I think that this COVID thing has got everybody just gutted. And the one thing I really think we can do much, much better about is understanding that our life as an employee is not the center of the universe. And that there may be a parent out there trying to say, how am I going to get back to work? How I'm going to get my kid to school? Is there safety on the bus? There's a myriad of things that happen at the household level that we need to think about and not just go all of a sudden, well, as soon as we get that MOU signed finally from an association, then we're back to school tomorrow morning, you better have your kids, let's go. Yeah, that's where I think the whole process is shut down regionally and even at the state level where superintendents are afraid to say it's the 23rd because somebody upstairs can go, oh no, now it's the 27th.
This
done.
This really is one of those areas where you lack clarity, isn't it? Because every you invest about what you should do. And thank you for sharing that. Other board members?
Well, I think it's important always to gather results and data. There's lots of stories, and sometimes you need to have the facts of what's really getting the temperature of what's going on. It is difficult with COVID. There's, people are tired and people can't meet face to face. There's a lot to be said to having a face to face, seeing people's, facial expressions, their body language, other things when it comes to communication. Our society's gotten very easy to throw out email that if you have a face-to-face meeting with someone, which would probably be much more pleasant and productive, then it's easy to just really just have a very negative, harsh tone with another person when you're doing it in an email versus a conversation. So then that starts becoming the data, not the really hard facts. So somehow I'd like to see how to gather that data. So, somebody's not calling me, someone's calling him, and you're getting all of these, what's the fact and what's the temperature? And, I had a rough week last week. I'm not going to lie. There was some, communications that were not the friendliest tone. That's hard because you're trying to do your best. And I think everybody has a common goal, but let's come together and have a conversation. And you just have to kind of take a perspective and go, yeah, okay, there was a few. We have 1,000 parents here. So then you have to just sort of say,
So true.
So I think gathering those facts and some things is important because otherwise the story or the emails or the rumors start becoming the data, and that's not really possible.
Kelly, there are people watching, and that's usually not normal for this. They would come.
Yeah.
Can you tell everybody, if you don't mind, what it is you actually do for a living, so we can understand that this ties directly to you?
Well, I was a classroom teacher. I actually started off in preschool. Then I got my degree and I became a teacher. I was like a coach. It's a different name, but it would be hard for people to understand what that is. I worked with, working with data, helping teachers, doing demo lessons, those type of things. Then I went on to be an assistant principal, and I went on to be a principal, and now I'm what you call it the director of curriculum and instruction for the elementary grades, TK through 5th. And so my job is to order all the curriculum, provide the professional learning, follow the strategic plan, and do the how of the strategic plan. We have a very strong strategic plan from where I come from. It's very different, and I try to keep Acton Aqua separate from my job. It's a very different organization. I have 17,000 students in my current. I have 1,000 teachers that I have to work with and train and help. So it's very different and unique. So I really try hard to make sure that those are separate. We don't have the same budget here that we have down there. We're very high in Title I funding and LCAP funding. So I do know how that works. With that being said, I'd like to get the data because that's how you make your goals and how you determine how you're doing.
Kelly, I think we're making progress here. So do you personally, in the last 2 weeks, know what it's like to have, okay, I have a cohort of kids that are failing, but they can't be in this cohort because they're failing different subjects. So you're trying to figure out as a curriculum director how to serve everybody using different materials, knowing that they can only be in one group.
Yes, we do have
Is everyone happy with that?
We do have a system.
The parents, are they happy with that? Are they sending you congratulatory emails? There we go.
I think overall what we're hearing is people do want to have their students return to school. And you will have some that do not, and you have to respect both sides and you have to make it work because you are here for children. You're not, unfortunately, sometimes friendships are sort of, hurting a little bit because overall I can't just serve your student, we're here for everyone. And equity is very, very important. Equity for all. I mean, I do have some goals that we've talked about in the gold standard and things we've asked Mr. Pink to do, because equity is very important for all students to have the best education possible.
So it is complex, and the point being too that you mentioned that in social media, fewer voices can be louder than we've ever heard them before. And it's always important to keep that into perspective. It doesn't take many voices to sound very, very loud and clear. It's important to put it in perspective. Other board members, any comments?
I would just touch on, I think that the communication is something that we need to really work on hard and make sure that the message is getting out there and understood in a way that everybody can understand it. I think a lot of people have a lot of false information that they may have found on the internet, or a certain person may have said so-and-so makes X amount of money, or so-and-so gets paid to call them, and so-and-so this and so-and-so that. We need to get ahead of that as a board, or as the superintendent, get ahead of it and put it out there in a way that people understand it. It's not cryptic, and just come down to the normal person's talk and help people understand more.
Good. Other comments?
Yeah, this session started, what do we think we've done well, what maybe haven't we done well? So from my perspective, so let's rewind a year. I mean, COVID's changed everything. But if you rewind a year, because we did this about 2 years ago last. What did we do well? I think that actually one of the things that we wanted to do was have a more engaged administration that was on the campuses more, that knew our students better, that provided opportunity for feedback from parent groups on the campuses and students. And honestly, I believe we did a very good job at that. If you look back a year, the superintendent, he heard us, he created a culture in which there was meetings with student groups, regular meetings with parent groups, opportunities to team build, all the way from the board down to the parents, like when a year ago we went, jumped in Lake Arrowhead. So there was a major push that we asked for to start focusing more on the softer things, the healthy things, because prior to that, it truly was all the smart side of the equation. And I think that we made really good strides in that. Now, of course, with all the tension and everything in the last year, it's harder. And there were certainly some personnel decisions that, like we all know, you just cannot talk about. You only ever hear one side. So, and another thing, for example, in terms of transparency, every contract with a staff person that we approve, all the numbers are read out at a board meeting. If you want to know, go back and look at the board meeting. If you want to know, call the head office, because those are public documents. So you don't need, but it's, that's part of the thing with social media is people reach out and sometimes people don't have the right answer and you get misinformation propagated. And there's no silver bullet to that. I always tell people in the community, come talk to me, my friends, if you want to know an answer, because if you go and take it off of the chat room, chances are, probably 50% or higher is wrong. So I just, I think we've tried very hard to do communication. I think that in the last year, of course, you can't keep ahead of the communication, although I do think we've tried as hard as we could with the all calls, the emails, the website, almost to a fault, where maybe it's a bombardment of information. On the other hand, things are rapidly changing. So you're kind of damned if you do, damned if you don't. So
and the
anyway,
communication has been coming like rapid fire. It's just like boom, boom,
and I'm
boom,
not
boom.
surprised people are confused. I can keep up.
I'm an educator and I can really explain. We go in like what's happening today, because what you hear in the 6 o'clock news is different than what you hear in the 11 o'clock news.
Absolutely. Well, part of that problem also is that the people that are putting that out in the social media world they have their own agenda. There are a certain group of people that think they're entitled to one thing or another, and then they throw it out there on the social media, or they phone a friend, and that friend phone another friend, and next thing you know, we have 5, 6, 10 people that all have the wrong information, that don't have any fact to it at all. It's just one person's opinion. They threw it out there, and here we are. We all get slammed with emails for the last 2 weeks, and there's only so much that we can respond to. It's frustrating.
Yeah, I'm not sure you're aware, there's a little bit of an elephant in the room, I think, for you. So, because of going through the layouts, I did share if there's any comments made, right, the reductions in force and so on. But there were several comments made publicly by an individual, and no disrespect to the individual, but many of them were not factual. There was a lot of misinformation shared, and then, as you know, what happens is oftentimes that voice becomes the message because there's no rebuttal. So I'm not going to ever, I think most people know me, I'm not going to be defensive, I'm not going to aggressive at that meeting. And so then there's this space of time that occurs between when I'm going to respond to it. But I do want the board to know that on next Thursday, I will respond to it because, to the board's point, there has to be some demystification to some of the things that were stated that were very inaccurate. So I do plan on doing that, and then again, to the board's point, my plan is to read it publicly and then post it on our social media accounts so that it's really out there. Because if I heard some of those facts, I would be very disheartened with the district.
I have some demystification. I'm looking at the camera. If you are someone that sends threatening emails to employees and uses my name and insinuates me as being involved in whatever your view on reality is, and you are threatening, and you have a threatening tone towards employees in my work environment, if I were to be subjected to that, I would take it to the city attorney and say, because you are allowing me to be subjected to this without any defense, I'm going to demand that you are going to defend me on this. And if you don't, then I'm going to own your house as well as the person that's slandering me. So I would just tell the public, be very, very careful in your tone and emails to any employee of this district. And I thank you for that. I get frustrated. Everyone gets frustrated. But it doesn't get to the point where we characterize board members as being a part of a slanderous agenda.
Well, I'm going to just, Tim, was there anything you wanted to add before we move forward?
The comments have been going well. A couple things I just want to say is that I think that we kind of get to the point where we're influenced by what other districts bigger than us, like Ken said, are doing, and yet we want to preserve our small community. I truly believe that we worked hard, staff has worked hard. As a small district, we can adapt and move quicker than a big district can, even though they have more resources than we do, and they can do these programs and have all these nice, like I tease Kelly, I'm totally amazed every time I see Palmdale school buses because they're got tire black and they're clean and they're nice and they're just like,
They're beautiful.
it's totally impressive, but they have money and they run on paved roads, not dirt roads. But there's so many things that we gather that the thought comes, I see other districts do it, how come we can't do it? And so it's incumbent upon staff, and Larry's done a good job with this, like Mike said, the emails and the all calls to alert people that here's what we're doing now, what we can do. And as we move forward, and then along with what Kelly was saying, collecting the data, well, educators and boards and staff and superintendents look at numbers just like the Department of Health does. When you can open, when you hit 0.4 and less than 0.7.
Okay, so it would seem that this first part of the workshop is on team building and discussing why they became board members and what they'd like to see in the school district moving forward, and communicating with parents and clarity and culture and things like that. So I am going to stop the video and wait and see if they discuss charter governance, which is also supposed to be discussed today. And when that topic comes up, I'll start recording again, because I think a lot of what we're seeing in this first hour or so is a lot of what I've recorded is what I've just mentioned. So in order to save some time on the battery and to not have too much that's the same thing on the video here, I'm going to stop it and see if maybe they'll talk about charter revenue and charter governance later on. So I'm going to take a break now.
Absolutely.
I guess the best segue I can do is I was preparing to introduce our next presenter, which is yourself, Eric Stevens, who's with the law firm of Edwards, Tucker, Stevens, and Gerard. That you're part of what you do is the work that we did this morning. So you're very familiar with the work that you may have seen here as you were waiting. I'm guessing there's somebody potentially in our audience, or perhaps who reviews what the work we did today and says, well, gosh, we just heard about all these fiscal issues in the district, and now you have an attorney that you're going to spend some money on for the next hour or so, and whatever prep work was done, and so on and so forth. I just want to publicly share that the charter business is very intricate and complicated, and my philosophy on legal counsel is this: you're going to either spend some money proactively, or you're going to spend a lot of money reactively if you make a mistake. So there's a new charter law, AB 1507, which we've been talking about, AB 1505, which we've been talking about, and we authorize 12 charter organizations. Spending an hour or so with our attorney, my professional opinion, is well worth the expenditure. I'd rather be prudent, and I just wanted the public to know that, because there could be somebody sitting out there saying, why are we spending the money on that? So I just wanted to be really clear about that piece, and I will turn it over to you. I did notice, in addition to you graduating from Harvard Law School, that prior to that, you graduated from my alma mater. You're a Bruin, so congratulations on that. I was 20 years earlier than you, to the tune of 1987, so you're a bit younger than me, but nonetheless, welcome aboard, and glad to have you here. And Shay Patterson, thank you as well for joining us. I know you're going to be kind of tag teaming with Eric Stevens on this, so thank you.
Thank you very much, Superintendent King. And good morning, trustees. I'm going to start a screen share. Trustees, you have, it's my understanding, a paper copy of these slides, but I'm going to use this to help organize our discussion this morning, and also for the audience at home. They can see what we're talking about. I would like to quickly just talk about, theoretically, our agenda this morning, but I want to refer back to something that I heard President Jensen say about 30 minutes ago. I believe she said she would prefer quality discussion rather than quantity of topics, and I 100% agree. So Director Pattison and I, we have erred on the side of trying to give you more material in written slide form than we possibly have time to cover in complete depth. Our goal is to go relatively quickly through what is in the slides with complete encouragement and the hope that you trustees will interrupt and ask questions so we can go more in depth to topics or questions or issues where you've got particular questions. In theory, if we have time to get through all of this, we will talk a little bit about recent changes in the Charter Schools Act. We will talk about the general petition review process, and especially the legal grounds that a petition can be denied, because those grounds that we may use to deny a charter petition really shape how we review petitions and how staff and legal counsel develop a recommendation on charter items for the board. Moving on, the renewal process is very similar, but has several key differences to the general petition review process. We're going to touch upon material revisions, and then of course we're going to talk about the important points of monitoring and oversight of our charter schools, which then flows naturally into finally talking about revocation. Because if during the course of a charter petition, through our monitoring and oversight, we see problems and those problems are not being fixed, our ultimate authority as authorizer is to start that revocation process. Before I dive in, are there any questions or comments from the board? All right, we're going to get going, and since all of you are in one room, it can be a little difficult for me to see or hear. So please just raise a hand or just jump in. And Trustee Jorgensen, if you want to unmute at any time and jump in, please don't hesitate. As Superintendent King mentioned, there are currently 12 authorized district charter schools. You can see there's a lot of variety here. Looking to the future, looking to next year, you have an iLead Online and an Options for Youth charter petition coming up on renewal. We just handled several renewals over the last couple months, but in general, we talk about the charter schools overseen by the district as either being virtual, they are purely online, hybrid, in which case most of the work or maybe half of the work is done online, but students will periodically go to an in-person location, or site-based. We currently have one site-based charter school, iLead Agua Dulce. You see another column there where we've indicated whether a school is DAS, that means Dashboard Alternative School Status. We'll touch upon that when we talk about renewal and academics, or WIOA. WIOA is the Workforce Innovation and Opportunities Act. It is shorthand for particular types of charter programs that team up with federally funded programs, of which WIOA is one. They tend to really focus on high school students, perhaps students who've been academically struggling, students who may have dropped out and are looking to do credit recovery, to get a GED, to get back on track for graduation. And as part of these WIOA partnerships that the charters enter into, there's a lot of focus on practical real-life skills and job training. But it also makes our job as an authorizer and as a oversight authority a little bit different. The main guiding documents and programs that the district uses when it's reviewing petitions and overseeing its charters are first the charter school policy. And you can all expect to see a largely heavily updated charter school policy presented to you in the next several months this spring for a number of reasons. As we're going to touch upon, there have been recent legislative changes, but also we're always continuing to review practices and
I apologize. I was just kicked out of the meeting by my internet, I believe. Hopefully they'll let me back in.
So when I do go out and I visit the charters, like Eric said, what I do is I will give them actually a partial checklist from FigMat, because the documents that they've entered into Epicenter, a lot of that information is in that FigMat checklist. However, when I visit, there's more information that I want to gather that you can't just gather on a piece of paper. So that's the purpose of giving them a partial checklist, so that we can actually go over and verbally talk about what is entered in that checklist.
So it assures that nothing falls through the cracks, so to speak, and that if there's something that you see, I need a little more information about this. That's what that does. Okay, good. Thank you. That's all I have.
Turning to recent changes in the Charter Schools Act, we had AB 1505 and 1507. There has been some recent board discussion about these items, so I'm just going to hit the highlights. Together, they represent a comprehensive package of reforms to how charter schools get authorized and renewed. Additional legally permissible reasons that a new charter petition can be denied were added to the law. I have heard multiple people dramatically simplify these laws and describe it as there are now more reasons a new petition could be denied, but there is a much stronger and more objective focus on academic measures when it comes to renewal. There were some minor changes to credentialing requirements. Now the credentialing requirements for charters are going to be very closely aligned with traditional school districts and county offices. And AB 1507 created additional limits on where geographical sites of charter schools can be located. So now, moving forward, any new charter school, they must be located within their authorizing district's boundaries unless they provide instruction exclusively in partnership, that's the phrase in the law, with a program like WIOA, or one of these job force and youth training programs. Turning to the petition requirements, as I said, I'm going to try and go through this very quickly to allow you to ask questions. On the other hand, if you don't have a lot of questions about this portion, that's 100% fine. We have a lot of material we can dig into today. The board's role is, first and foremost, to consider the level of support for a petition. That is the stated purpose of the public hearings that we are legally obligated to hold. Beyond that, a petition review is conducted by staff and legal counsel, which ultimately produces a recommendation to you, the board. But at the end of the day, that is just a recommendation. And as you will see, of the multiple reasons a petition can be denied, many of them are very subjective. And reasonable people can reach different results and can disagree. So no matter what a staff recommendation is, it is the board's role and authority and obligation to really think about the issue, think about the petition, and reach a conclusion about whether it should approve or deny a petition. And then staff's role is to provide the best recommendation we can, but ultimately do our best job to help implement your decision. The petition timeline is slightly different based on those recent legislative changes. We have a bit more time now to hold a public hearing on a petition, but we still want to hold those public hearings early because the public hearing, the law doesn't tell us what it has to contain or how it has to be run, aside from the board president is going to bang the gavel, open a public hearing, take comment, and close a hearing. In some districts, board members use that initial public hearing as an opportunity to ask questions and talk about the petition. That may be when you want to hold an initial hearing with your charter petitioners. And just because you may have done things a particular way in recent years doesn't mean you can't change those practices going forward. I recommend that we continue to hold public hearings early because even though we have extra time, there's now a requirement that any staff recommendations, any written recommendations or proposed findings have to be published for the public at least 15 days in advance of a meeting at which the board might approve or deny a charter. So in theory, on paper, it looks like we have more time to act, but the requirement to publish findings so early means that staff is still hustling to get a recommendation to you. If a board doesn't take action within 90 days, then it's whatever was submitted to the board, whatever was being considered, is deemed to have been approved. So it's important that we take action within those timelines. And finally, we can always ask a charter school or charter petitioners to mutually agree to a 30-day extension to all of this. So I've mentioned the grounds for denial. There are now 8 legally permissible reasons a school district board can deny an initial charter petition. And the Charter Schools Act gives an enormous amount of discretion to you, the board, because as you'll see, so many of these areas are very subjective. The law, the Charter Schools Act, says you can deny a petition if you make written findings that it has an unsound educational program. But then the law that we have to follow really doesn't define what that means beyond the phrase unsound educational program. This is common throughout the Charter Schools Act. However, the district has, and the recommendation is to continue using the State Board of Education's regulations. The State Board of Education created detailed regulations, creating definitions for a lot of these terms that are undefined in the law to help guide review and help guide staff decisions. We don't have to follow those regulations, but like many other districts, we have followed those, and we intend to continue to do that unless you, the board, want to provide some different direction. So typically, in the State Board of Education regulations, to be found to have an unsound educational program is a pretty high bar. They're literally looking at the likelihood of physical or emotional harm and trauma. Number two, this is equally subjective. You can deny a petition if you think the petitioners are demonstrably unlikely to successfully implement the program. What in the world does that mean? Well, the State Board of Education regulations say the state board would look at how much experience the petitioners have, whether they have prior experience, do they have experience running successful charters or unsuccessful charters, and have they provided and proposed realistic, achievable goals in the charter petition. Signatures is one of the much more objective requirements. We check to see if a certain minimum number of signatures are included, and if the signature pages have included legally required statements about what signing that petition means. Beyond that, the law doesn't say anything about verifying signatures. Some places do. Verifying signatures, we could talk about that in great detail because how you verify and what you look for is tricky. The law doesn't say anything about it. What we do and what the State Board of Education would do and does is we just look for the number of signatures. They need to have signatures from potential parents representing at least 50% of the enrollment of students they expect in the first year, or signatures from credentialed teachers representing at least 50% of the teachers they would need in their first year of operations. We check to see if they have those signatures. We check for duplicates. If they meet the number of signatures, they have satisfied this, and we do not recommend denial based on a finding that they lack signatures. Even just the way I said that, it's very awkward. Everything in the Charter Schools Act is framed in the negative. So we're always asking, do grounds exist to deny them for X? Or do grounds not exist to deny them for X? Required affirmations, this is incredibly objective. There is a list in the law of things they have to say in the petition. They have to say, we will not discriminate on the basis of race, gender, creed, etc. There are about 20 protected categories. That's just one of many examples. We check to make sure those affirmations are in a petition. We check to make sure that they don't inadvertently contradict those affirmations anywhere else in the petition. The big, I would say, heart of review is the reasonably comprehensive descriptions. So within this one potential ground for denial, there are 15 expected elements of a petition. We look for all of these things. And the state board regulations, this is where they provide the most detail. The state board adds some meat to the bones of the law, saying you can deny them if they don't have a reasonably comprehensive description of employee qualifications. What does that mean? Well, we use the state board regulations to help define that. I'm going quickly, and this is one of the big pieces that we look at. Let me pause. Any questions?
None for me.
We're good, Eric.
Okay, great. What is reasonable?
I have one.
Yes.
So we're talking about renewals. Can we go back? Racial and ethnic balance. I mean, they're supposed to match your district. So if that objective is not achieved, in theory, there's a ground for denial of renewal. Is that a true statement?
The law explicitly says they have to propose a reasonable program to try and achieve that racial and ethnic balance. And I think if it's renewal and they haven't done it, I think it is I would say it's, well, if they haven't done it, I don't know that I would recommend you say, well, they only have to propose to do it. However, I'm going to suggest we wait just a couple minutes because one of the new grounds for denial has a lot of overlap with this piece.
Okay, I'll wait.
Okay,
Right.
great.
Data matters, right? In theory.
Yes. Yep.
Eric, I have a comment.
Yes.
You recall about 3 years ago, you were asked to come in and look at the appropriateness of pre-enrollment questionnaires. The California ACLU made a broad statement that charters tend to eliminate people that are typically your Title I people by asking questions about what language do you speak when you're talking to your grandfather and all these weird questions. And I think this district put that on the table very early by having you do a broad review of several of the different charters pre-enrollment forms. In other words, if you walk into the door of a school, you can't ask questions about whether they have SPED, a history, or things like that. So we had a close look at some of the enrollment forms to make sure that they were appropriate to the ACLU's thing. So that has not been an issue for this district for at least 3 to 5 years.
Yes, I remember that. And we, by which I mean the district, the staff, told several charters, we do not want you using any of those sort of pre-enrollment questionnaires. And they went along with us, that they agreed, they changed their practice.
Yeah,
because
it wasn't like it was a widespread problem, but we've been systematically looking at some of these things that are now new rules that we haven't needed for a number of years, is my point.
Correct. Yep. And once a student says, I want to enroll, then it is understandable and in many ways appropriate that a lot of those questions get asked, but it should happen after a student says, I want to enroll. That's when you ask a student, do you have an IEP? Because the charter needs to get ready and needs to get prepared to serve that student with any services they may need. Where you have problems is when those questions get asked up front before they've expressed interest in enrolling. That can lead to intentional or unintentional discrimination and discouragement of students from enrolling.
And that's where some of these ideas come from, that there's not this racial or regional population demographic balance. Thank you. We have people watching on today, Eric.
Yes.
Thanks.
So reasonably comprehensive, I'm not going to dive into this because we have definitions of what we consider to be reasonably comprehensive for all of those 15 items. Exclusive public employer, this was added about 2 years ago. This is very straightforward. It can literally be a sentence. We just need to know, is the charter school going to be the exclusive employer of those employees? As a quick side note, we oftentimes hear the terms dependent or independent charter school. Those phrases are not used anywhere in the law, so there's no definition of what it means. But typically, we mean a dependent charter is a situation in which a board, a school board, may have effectively petitioned itself to create a charter school of the district. That's an example where if a charter school's employees are employees of the district, it is very clearly what we would refer to as a dependent charter. And you'd see that pop up in this element, in this question. They need to state what this is. Everybody does it. I haven't seen anyone miss it because literally it can only take a sentence. This is one of our new grounds that we may deny a charter petition, unlikely to serve the interests of the community. And when Trustee Fox was asking questions about the racial and ethnic balance piece, this is what I was referring to when I said, let's just wait a minute. It's broader than just racial and ethnic balance, but this was added as a way to try and tackle questions of, do we think the charter school is going to be open and available to everyone in the community? Do we think it's going to be able to benefit everyone in the community? And what, if any, impact do we think it may have on the authorizers, the school district's programs? So where I have seen this come up most often is when you do have smaller, more rural districts, because if a charter school comes in with a comprehensive program, that could undermine the level of student enrollment in the district's programs and undermine its ability to have enough students for things like certain advanced placement classes, In rural districts and rural communities, we oftentimes hear concern about sports as well. They say, gosh, if this charter school opens and 100 of our high school students go there, we may not be able to field a football team. But it's broader than that. And this is also a way to tackle those questions and concerns. If you think a program will not achieve a equitable racial and socioeconomic balance just because of the nature of the program, that can be incorporated into this finding as grounds for denial. Questions? This is one of the new pieces in the law.
Eric, would you say that this has its foundations in the idea that charters tend to come in and glean off the highest performing students academically, which leads to the idea that there's basically a false economy in how the district scores appear suddenly, because when you offset the highest scores coming out over the broader student body, it makes the charter look smarter. And if there's a way to use that form I was talking about earlier to keep the SPED students out of your charter, you can take basically what appears to be people cattle shooted right into the charter based on their privilege.
Yes, yeah, it's my opinion. Oh, sorry.
Only I would put it that way.
It's my opinion that this is absolutely a response from the legislature to concerns that some charters attract, they disproportionately attract students who are not English learners, who are not socioeconomically disadvantaged, who are not students of color. This is a direct response, I believe, to that. That's my opinion, but I think that's a commonly held opinion. I'm not out on a limb on that one. And sometimes that is the case. Like, there are many charters in California, they're all different. There certainly are some charters who, for whatever reason, have not attracted and enrolled a student body that's reflective of the local student body. On the flip side of that, I will say, as we mentioned at the very beginning, you have a number of programs that have DAS status, Dashboard Alternative School status. You have a number of charters which have these WIOA partnerships. Many of those charters serve a student body that is disproportionately socioeconomically disadvantaged, disproportionately English learners. So you have to look at every charter individually, but I 100% agree that that was the impetus for adding this into the law.
Can I ask a question?
Yes,
Yeah.
of course.
Is number 7 valid to be considered with a renewal?
It is not, and we will turn to renewals shortly and talk about that, but spoiler alert, number 7 and what we're about to talk about, the 8th reason for denial, these are not grounds for denial of a renewal petition. Okay. That is that trade-off, that compromise that I mentioned, that most people say is in AB 1505. There are more reasons we can deny brand new petitions, but renewal, it is arguably harder to deny renewal petitions, and there's much more focus on an objective academic set of criteria.
So then the corollary to that question then, and then I'll stop, is since you answered my initial question about racial and socioeconomic balance and said, well, let's talk about it in the context of number 7. Number 7 isn't applicable to renewals. So now let's not talk about it in the context of number 7. Let's talk about it in the context of the top 15. For renewal, is that legitimate? And the reason I ask that is, let's be honest with ourselves. We have a school out there that has the local schools, our 3, have 300% higher ratio of English second language learners, or it's socioeconomic. I mean, one was 300%, one was 170%. So for me, that charter may not be doing everything they can or should be doing more to reflect the district as a whole. And so when we talk about racial and ethnic balance here, is that applicable for renewal? How somebody's actually doing. I'm not talking about WIOA or DAS, because in those cases, those programs are expressly designed to actually go after the students who need that help, and the dropouts or other problems. So in fact, they're tailoring their program to help them, not to inadvertently exclude them. Now I'm talking about a program that's a more general program, like what we do here, where we have to serve all students. In that case, when you've got a charter that is, 1/3 the ratios of either socioeconomic or racial or English language learner, do we just look at the data and ignore it when renewal time comes? Or do we look at the data and say, whether it's intentional or not, there's some creaming, it's inappropriate, we're not serving all the students of this district. Can we or can we not?
Sorry. Just a little bit. When we are looking at the renewals, also, we are looking at what processes the charter is implementing in order to be able to get those students. So if they are promoting through the local paper, if they are providing information in several languages, are they promoting it in the areas where the students that they are trying to attract are in? So with the district, because the district is so small and specific, it may not be as easy to reflect the ethnic and racial balance because of the location, for one, of the charter, which may be outside of the smaller area that we live in. So their racial and ethnic balance, although they may try and attract those students, may not actually be reflective of the
I understand. You get a certain amount of credit for trying. Now I'm asking, as a board member, do I get to look at results? Especially if it's more or less in the same community and, geographically, which I know we have one. And so I expect them to do better. And can I expect them to do better?
I would say yes.
Thank you.
And the reason why I say that's what I would say is because I promise I'll just take 1 minute. Education Code 47605 contains all these grounds for denial. It is written about brand new petitions. We have a later statute which just very quickly says renewal petitions will be governed by the standards and criteria of this earlier law. So the literal grammar, the choice of words, the grammar, the structure of how the law is written with these 15 elements, it's written as if we're looking at a brand new petition. So the racial and ethnic balance piece as written, the law explicitly talks about their plan and their proposal to achieve a racial and ethnic balance that's reflective of the community in which they intend to locate. When we get to the renewal stage, I would say, well, look, clearly the law was written with a focus on a brand new petition, but on renewal, I would say it is appropriate to look at the actual results.
Thank you.
So someone could say all they have to do is propose it, but they're proposing a new plan. Do you think their proposed plan is credible in the next 5 years? So these things get technical because everything is vague, nothing is defined, and we have to try and figure it out. But it's that same vagueness that gives a board so much discretion and authority in these areas.
And that's what I wanted to understand. As a single board member, I only have one vote, but as you said in the beginning, it's our job as individual board members to agree or not agree with the recommendations and the findings of the district, and our obligation to do so. And I asked if that's something that I could consider, and you said yes. Thank you.
Eric,
Yes.
Eric, it's Ken. I'm going to say something you won't say. I was going to save this to the end. Now I'll have to be quiet after this. But my experience with you goes back quite a few years. I remember you being in the appellate courtroom, which I was in at Newhall versus AAUSD, which, bear with me, people, make notes out in the audience, that Newhall was basically going after this district for about $480,000 under the grounds that in the case of Einstein, that mess, that they had acted in the capacity of the public attorneys general. In other words, we're doing something that is going to benefit education in the broader sense, so therefore we're entitled to the money we spent back. Your argument was that the appellate court had asked that you update your fact pattern, but you do not have the fact pattern review. That's not what an appellate court does. Newhall had represented that they lost 100 students through this process and not updated that number to over 500. So the court very quickly figured out that Newhall had a much bigger financial interest in this to the tune of 12 million, where this district had something else. So it was thrown out. So congratulations, Mr. Stevens, on keeping this district from not having to hand someone $500,000 through your superior skills. And while we're on it, I don't want to sound like I like attorneys, because I don't, but you have reviewed every petition that I've asked for on this board and provided staff the initial recommendation that says that this is something we should either look at or it's grossly outside of legal parameters. But let's get to the elephant in the room. We know who the school board president was when Newhall versus AAD-USD went to the appellate court. We know that that person ended up being elected, and we know that all this legislation in the 1505 to 1507 series was generated by that same individual in the legislature. And we know that the idea here is we snuff the new charter petitions coming in while we bleed the ones that are left over out over a period of time. That's what this is really all about. I'm done. Wow, I silenced an attorney. Incredible.
I will just say that the financial arguments, those were made by the trial court judge in that case. And at the Court of Appeal, it was a question of, did the Court of Appeal agree with the trial court judge, or did they think the trial court judge was totally off base? And at the end of the day, the Court of Appeal said, no, we don't think the trial court judge was totally off base. We thought it was reasonable that the judge concluded that there were some big financial interests and incentives at play in that lawsuit. I will also use the discussion on that racial and ethnic balance piece, the reasonably comprehensive description, to quickly point out that we do all of this in the shadow of a potential appeal. If we deny anything, the charter petitioners can appeal to the County Board of Education. If the County Board of Education agrees with us and supports the denial, the petitioners can appeal to the State Board of Education. So when we talk about that racial and ethnic balance piece, I was saying, it's my opinion on renewal, you can look at actual results. It's possible that if we denied on that ground, the County Board of Education might disagree and say, the law says they need to propose a plan. We think their plan is reasonable. But personally, if this was going to happen next week, if we had made that finding, I think it's likely that the county board and probably or maybe possibly the state board would agree with the approach of looking at 5 years of results when determining whether we think there is a reflective racial and ethnic balance or is likely to be a reflective racial and ethnic balance in the next 5 years if a petition gets renewed. All right, and it is 11:44. We've been talking for about 45 minutes. But again, to the extent you've got questions, we want to dig in. We would rather spend all of our time talking about a couple of these pieces than breeze through everything and prevent you from asking questions. The 8th reason that was added that we can deny a brand new initial charter petition is the fiscal impact on the district. But a district already needs to have a qualified interim certification, and then the district needs to get support from the county superintendent and FCMAT. The county superintendent and FCMAT must certify that, yes, if the district approves this petition, it will further negatively impact the district's current budget certification. So it is ultimately something that goes to the county we have to be in a qualified budget situation, and ultimately we need the county's support to say, yes, we agree. All of which goes back to those timelines. Staff really has to jam with these reviews, because if this is a potential issue, staff needs time to go to the county to see if the county supports it, to hear back from the county, to see whether we can actually use that as one of the potential grounds for denial. Possible board actions?
Sorry, I have a question.
Yes.
Sorry, Eric.
No problem. No, I want you to interrupt.
This is the new stuff.
Yes.
So, because before, it was harder to say no, and you couldn't look at local things like this. So, this applies to a new petition or a material revision?
Both.
Okay, I just want to make sure it includes material revision. Next, do you already have to be in bad shape? You already have to be negative certification to say, this is going to hurt me? I mean, until you're sick, you don't get to consider this? I mean,
you have to be qualified. So,
but a district that might be in healthy short-term budget consideration can't use that because today I'm well?
Correct.
Okay, but I shouldn't confuse that with earlier when you said, and this is to news and renewal, demonstrably impact or be repetitive with an ongoing educational program under this.
Correct.
Okay, so this you could use, but the other one for sheer finances, you have to already be qualified or halfway to broke.
Yes. And the reality is, if there is a ground to deny, there are probably multiple grounds to deny. And because these standards are generally so vague, there can be a lot of overlap.
Okay. I just, again, these are all new to all of us, everybody in the state. Thank you.
Mm-hmm. So Eric,
yes.
Just an imaginary circumstance. Let's say there was some district somewhere in Mars or somewhere that had subsidized its budget with 30%, by the tune of 30% to charter revenue. Suddenly that was taken away. And in order not to, just for everybody watching, certified, positively certified means normal. The county's looking at you. You can meet your debts and everything for the next 3 years. Qualified means you're having a problem in one of the outer years, and negative certifications means you can't even meet your current stuff, and the state's going to come in and assign a superintendent. We all go away, and that person does exactly, regardless of what nasty emails you send, do what they want to do. So back to this imaginary group, and let's say that you've just gone through a budget exercise and submitted a 12-position reduction as a means of meeting a budget, and that would kind of say you're this close to being certified without doing that, or maybe even negative. Maybe that school district just might fit this criteria.
Yes.
There we go. I'm done.
Yep.
That is a good question.
Good question.
I want to make sure I understand the implications of Mr. Falsgard's question.
That sounds different.
Let me dummy this up.
If we took action expressly to prevent being in a negative
certification,
interim certification, if we expressly took action to do that, then we can consider the fact that we avoided it by taking some draconian express action says that we can use this mechanism as a grounds for denial.
I'm sorry then. I think I misheard. If your budget is not qualified, if you have a positive budget, then we wouldn't meet the first step. We wouldn't meet the first piece of this test, which is to have a qualified or a negative certification.
So the idea is to deny first and then fix things.
That sounds like an unintended consequence of the way they drafted this piece of the law, which, if you're familiar with the Charter Schools Act, you will know it is a long history of unintended consequences.
Yep.
But also that's legislation in general.
To use yard sale terminology, had this imaginary district not acted to reduce 12 positions as a definable means to meet LACO's requirement, regardless of what actually happens between now and the end of the year, hint, hint, then we could just pretend that we're laying off a bunch of people to make it look like we're this far from being qualified as a means of keeping the charter up. So anyway, this is getting way off in the weeds, but we're kind of trying to tell you between the lines, people, that we fit this right now. Okay.
I will add that this second piece, I don't know what the county would do or say. We don't know what the county would do or say. This is all brand new, but presumably based on the way this is written, the county is going to ask, if that petition is authorized, do we think it will have a further negative financial impact on the authorizer? So I'm going to use an example where I think the county would be less likely to come back and say that. That would probably be one of the WIOA programs. The WIOA programs, we call them WIOA programs, because they have this exclusive partnership, they can operate over a broad geographic area. If many of their students are outside of your district, then it seems a lot less likely that the superintendent would say, if you approve them, it will have a negative impact on your budget. The flip side would be if you have a charter that is drawing most or all of its students from within your boundaries, that seems like the situation in which it's likely the superintendent would say, if you authorize that charter, it is likely to have a negative impact on your budget.
Thanks.
Eric,
Thank you.
quick question on that.
Yes.
So on that one, that last part you said the superintendent would say that, will they tell us that only on invitation if we ask them, or will they give us, hey, hold on a second, if you guys authorize this, you need to double think that. Do they alert us, or do they wait until we ask them?
This is all new, so practices could change in the future, but I think we would have to ask them because they don't necessarily know whether the district is considering a charter petition if we don't tell them.
Okay.
So I think this is one of those items where the district would have to say, we've got concerns under number 8, and we've got a qualified or negative budget. We're going to go to the county superintendent, and we're going to ask their fiscal department to look at this and tell us whether or not they'll make this certification under number 8.
Eric, they may be hesitant to do that just in case it would set a precedence if they weren't being objective in a possible appeal if the local LEA didn't approve them. So, but I would think that back to the imaginary district on Mars, if you had 6 years of LACO budget documents warning you that dependence on charter revenue might actually be a problem at some point, that might be a way that they could set the precedent along with the layoffs and the fiscal correction plans that are being required. The documentation of that, I think, would be adequate.
I'll say again, because this is brand new, it's hard to even make an educated guess because we just haven't seen this get used. And until we see how county offices, and in particular LACO, are reacting when they get these requests, it's hard to make any sort of educated guess about what they would do or what would happen. But it is 11:54. I know you still have items today. So here's a question. What do you think is the best way to spend our last few minutes? We could go a little bit over if that's your interest, but we definitely don't want to take up too much extra time. Renewals, oversight, revocation. I would say between talking a bit more about renewals and how they're different and oversight, it would be my recommendation that we talk a little bit in detail about one or the other. But you tell me, as the board, what would you like to do?
I think renewal.
Yeah.
Renewal,
Okay.
please.
All right, so petition renewal. The key ways petition renewal is different is we can't consider number 7 and number 8 that we just talked about. We can focus on the first 6 grounds. Actually, sorry, correction. 5 of the 8 grounds for denial. A renewal petition doesn't need to submit signatures. So we ask, do we think they're demonstrably unlikely to successfully implement the petition? Do they have reasonably comprehensive descriptions? We go through those 5 items. A key difference, which the board has some experience with, but for the benefit of the full board and the public, we'll talk about material revisions. A material revision is defined as adding a site or adding grade levels. Beyond that, what counts as a material revision is a gray area. A lot of it is up to the board. When we get a renewal petition, a new piece of the law added by AB 1505 says that, I'll describe it as changes to the status quo. Changes in the renewal petition that reflect a change from the existing petition, aside from just updating dates and updating budgets and things like that, we could call that a material revision. We have to talk and we have to think about, is it material, is it not? If they're adding grade levels that aren't in the petition, if they're adding a new site that isn't in the petition, we can definitely say that's a material revision. The law tells us it is. We can take that piece, and if they have not separately given us a written material revision request, we can carve it off and put it to the side, and we can look at that separately. So we can use the 5 grounds for denial for the renewal petition that reflects the status quo based on what's already in the petition. We can see whether we think there are grounds for renewal or denial there. And then we can look at the material revision piece. We had one recent example where a charter petition on renewal was proposing to add a WIOA program, but they were looking at least a year down the road before the WIOA program started. And the recommendation from staff was that we didn't think they had the type of backup documentation and information and support we would normally expect to make the findings that, yes, you can be a WIOA petition. Because if they become a WIOA program, that gives them the opportunity to operate sites outside of our boundaries. And we always look carefully at that and make findings. That's an example where the recommendation that the board adopted was to approve the underlying renewal, but we carved out the WIOA piece and said, at this time, we don't think the information and the documentary support is there. We're denying that piece. And now the charter can come back over the next years. They've developed their program and their plan, and they can say, hey, here's a material revision petition if they want to add the WIOA piece. I'll pause there before we talk about academic tiers. Questions, comments?
What you just described sounds to me like somebody going from having sites that they've had historically outside of district boundaries. They want to establish those sites there, or they're unfavorable political climate issues going on where they have their sites. So when you jump to WIOA, suddenly you're not there. So if you embed that in the renewal petition, there's this danger that the optic is, as soon as this is approved, you're just going to run rampantly and build your network back up. So I get that. These are conversations that for someone to understand them that hasn't invested the time would take an hour of flow charts and things like that. But that's a good example of saying, hey, we're not a rampant authorizer that's going to open up the floodgates of hell by a little line somewhere in a petition. So thank you.
And the district has historically had positive relations with authorized charters, which from my perspective has also given the district more influence with prospective petitioners who said, hey, we're going to submit a petition, or we are submitting a petition. So there have been many, many times when the district staff has said to petitioners or prospective petitioners, look, we hear what you're saying. We're concerned about your ability to implement this program. We don't think we would recommend this for approval by the board. That has resulted many times in people withdrawing their petitions and leaving and dropping the issue. So the board has not denied, well, relative to how many petitions, new petitions the board has denied, there have been far more petitions where the board staff told the petitioners, you don't have a good petition here. We're not going to recommend that the board approve this, and they've taken off. They've withdrawn the petition, or they never even submitted.
And that comes from people watching us do the work on the district website of what kind of process we're going to put these people through. They know what questions I'm going to ask. They know what questions Mike is going to ask. and they know what questions Kelly is going to ask, and staff would just tell them, if you want to go through that and end up being tore up from the floor up by false draft, come on in. But other than that, I can't make this recommendation.
So we already talked about this very quickly, just hitting the high points of renewal, and then we'll turn it back over for final questions and for the board to move on with the rest of its morning. This is a bit of a simplification, but we can look at the dashboard, the California school dashboard. If a school has all blues and greens, the law says they're high performing, and it is very difficult for us to deny renewal of their petition. We have a really high bar to make special particular findings to deny that high performing school. If we approve the renewal, we could renew for 5, 6, or 7 years. The law also tells us that if a school has all red and orange on the key dashboard indicators, it is low performing. We are expected to deny that petition unless we make special findings to justify renewing the petition. In that case, the renewal period is shorter. It is 3 years. Most schools fall into the middle bucket, medium. Anything else, any other combination of dashboard indicators, it's medium performing. The law says the expectation is really that that school will be renewed or at least won't be denied for academic reasons. If we deny a medium performing school, we also need to make some findings on the academic piece. We need to find that denial is still in the best interest of the students in that medium performing school. So you have these materials in writing. These are public documents. I've hit the highlights. On the staff side, Director Pattison really has to dive in to the academic data, especially because with COVID-19, there has been a suspension of so much regular standardized testing. The law has even been temporarily tweaked to change the windows we look at for the academic data. And in many cases, we need to really dig to try and come up with some sort of academic performance criteria, academic data. We're supposed to use verified data. I'm going to quickly just mention DAS. We talked about this a few times.
Eric, that's my quick question. A very quick question is exactly associated with DAS. So with DAS, of course, which their program's designed for people who are not making it in the nominal system. Mm-hmm. How does the tier, the color system apply to DAS schools? Is it still applicable?
Well, I'll interrupt.
Or are they graded differently, such that, you know, the fact that their DAS is taken into account somehow when looking at the color system?
It's a modified calculation, and it's appropriate in evaluating the success and the progress of the students that are at high risk. And essentially, when we're looking at the alternative assessments, we're looking at assessments that we can validate. So I'll give an example. A number of charters use the NWEA, and in that there are predictors, and validating information is a part of them giving me access so that I can look at the data and I can verify that there is student growth. And right now, because of all of the changes in testing, that's one of the things that we're looking at, is being able to verify the data and looking at growth. That's the big
Okay, I think I heard the answer I was looking for. Yes, we do have a color system, but the calculations are different for the DAS schools. Is that basically what I heard?
DAS is, I would describe it as DAS is exempt. And okay. You've got this in writing and it's on the screen, but it's probably difficult for you to read. This is the key language from that section of the law that talks about the DAS schools. Okay. So Director Pattison, she needs to dig and try and figure out, but we have a lot of discretion here, but generally we're going to look at what's their student population.
Yep.
Can we find other schools with a similar student population? Yep. How does their performance compare? And
I
I have a question.
Thank you. Oh,
Yes.
Can I just finish up real
Yeah.
quick, Doug?
Yeah.
Thank you. You answered it. And the reason I was asking is, the problem, if you will. The DAS schools are designed to go after
Right.
these kids that need extra attention. And in a way, if those kids were in a normal student population, they might not change the statistics of that school, but that doesn't mean they're getting served. Now you put them in a school that's designed to serve them, and the numbers don't look good, and you're almost penalizing a system designed to serve kids that would just not even show up in the metrics of a much, much larger body. And it's so counterintuitive and almost unfair to those schools. So, okay, thank you. I understand.
But you want to see growth. My question is that
Yes.
because of the data that's coming out with the dashboard, last year we didn't have testing. This year we're supposedly having testing, but we all know that we don't know what that data is going to look like or how accurate it's going to be. So do you still require to do like a 5-year renewal because of the testing? I mean, this is so important when you're looking at those indicators. And I'm familiar with the NWEA to look out in the growth and all stuff, but still the data is pretty skewed. So my question is, what is that going to look like? Because I'm afraid that, you're going to ask us to renew charters and we don't really know how they're doing academically. Because, we could go in and say, well, this is what we're going to use now. And let's be honest. We can let our data at this point tell a story, but how accurate is it right now? So does that mean you can just do a shorter renewal until we have more data?
I'll just talk about just briefly the data. One of the things that LA County Office of Education is also working on, and some of the changes that are actually going to be happening because of this, has to do with the different forms of validated academic information that we can use, and it's going to be uniform of exactly what we are going to be able to look at.
And for better or worse, as part of the new law, CDE is preparing these reports. So when a charter renewal comes up or is coming up, CDE is going to tell us, for better or worse, CDE is going to say they're high performing or low or medium performing. And CDE is supposed to be pulling together the data and giving it to us, which really helps. But we do have these.
What data they're going to use. That's very interesting.
Right. And when it comes to the DAS schools, that's a much bigger gray area. The law does say, the new law says that when a DAS school is renewed, we as the authorizer are supposed to sit down with them and come to agreement on the academic measures we're going to use over the next 5 years or however long they've been renewed for. What measures will we use to judge them when they come up for renewal again? So that's helpful going forward, but it's not helpful right now because we haven't done that. We can't go back in time to 4 or 5 years ago and say, great, when you come up for renewal, we're going to be looking at MAP scores or what have you. So
I'm just wondering why it wouldn't be like a year to year during this time until we get more data, because asking a district to give you a 5-year when and I know we don't know what data is out there. I mean, that's a very scary area. So thank you.
We've got some organizational experience with this. Remember when AEA went out at in Agua Dulce, and there had been talk that we would be protected from all kinds of things, and we weren't. And then the new charter came in. I was the one that said, I'm not doing 5 years because there hasn't been a track record of either the district or another charter being able to make this on 140 kids. And I use the term corporate capacity. You have the corporate capacity to establish something, though, the enrollment of 140. So I kind of threw the deal on the table. I'm not giving you 5 years. I'm a no unless you take 3. So I think we've always had that. I think we've exercised that even 3 or 4 years ago. So a lot of this new stuff we've been doing. But I think when the rubber hits the road, if we want to talk like we're at a yard sale, the problem here is that Shay, the person in that capacity, has to let the superintendent know these people are blocking me from meaningful access to whatever data they have. That's a warning indicator. And that's what needs to be communicated from staff. That tells you that there's a problem. Because we can get into these long-term, blah, 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 this number. That stuff means nothing to me. I want to know who you're serving, to Mike's point, that there are people who are dropping out of the cracks, nobody wants them, and suddenly they learn how to weld or do meaningful things or productive things, I don't think you're going to see huge mass scores. But at the end of the day, are they giving you the data they need? And you want to remember, if you make a decision, people have rights to due process. Don't affect their right to due process, but say the best deal you're going to get out of us right now, to Kelly's point, is a 1-year renewal. And you can march that up to the county and they can tell us we're wrong. But I think that there's protections in place no matter how murky it looks. Thanks.
One more question. With DAS, though, we should still see some improvement regardless, whether it's attendance or some kind of improvement, because that's the joy of the dashboard, is seeing some improvement regardless.
I would think sometimes that the data you're looking at on the individual student might be a collective of 3 or 4 students who have walked in there, done some credit recovery and bailed. So I think the measure of how to look at an individual and say you're getting better, I think it's historically almost impossible to give that. If they tell you that, I mean, some of the board, I think either between Mike or you and our charter hearings in the past, have zoned in on that and said, what are we talking about here? Are we talking about a collective of unnamed students, or are we talking about Jimmy, who come in at 6th grade and walked out at 9th grade and progressed like this? So the nature of these programs, for lack of a better word, is flighty and hard to measure. If we're trying to measure against standard classroom education, I think the fact that these programs exist make that difficult.
I think we are out of time. We were going to wrap up talking about oversight. This is where Director Pattison was going to take the lead and really dive in. But there's always an opportunity for more discussions in the future. However, the district does a lot of oversight. Director Pattison, that is her job. There's also a lot of input and involvement from many other district staff. And there is a constant, continuous annual review cycle, not just of finances, but especially of academics. So I suggest as we close out, especially closing out the renewal piece, academics is a huge part of renewals. It's also a big part about potential revocation, which is an unfortunate truth. Charters can be revoked, but even if the law says you have to renew a petition for 5 years, if they're struggling financially, or if their academic results are poor, we have the opportunity to hold them accountable. And the typical approach has been to flag the problems and concerns, give them an opportunity to present plans to the district about how they're going to turn around their finances or their academics, and then hold them accountable to that if they're not able to deliver those results, which is an incredibly brief way to very quickly talk about a huge piece of what the district does. But as we said at the outset, better to have quality discussion than cover quantity of topics. So I'm prepared to turn it back over to everyone. To the extent the board wants to keep discussing this and asking questions, Director Pattison's here, I'm here, we're happy to keep talking, but I know it is 12:14 and you had a commitment to wrap up by 1, and you still have things on the agenda.
What's the next slide, please?
Thank you. Ken would like to see the next slide.
We just had some detailed slides at a very high level, expanding upon some of these numbers, the site visits, the annual reviews, the ongoing financial numbers.
There was a list of the ones that are coming up for renewal, and I'm looking at 3 of them being the same company.
I will hop back. Sorry, gotta zip way back. The chart towards the very beginning shows what year the charters were approved.
There were some that I think I saw a slide that showed the ones that are coming up for material revision very soon, and it had them isolated. It looked to me, I can see 3 on here that are.
For the sake of time, should we ask Shay to come back and do a future? We can put that later on the future agenda item to have her.
We should. Yeah, you should. Somebody should bring that up.
Shay, we're going to put it on. We're going to talk later about future agenda, so we'll bring you back to do a board meeting study session, because we know you've prepared, and we want to hear what you have to say. We're sorry we brought you in this Saturday and you can't share out, but for the sake of time, we'll put you on we'll discuss later future agenda items, and we'll let you do a study session.
Thank you, Shay.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very, very
Eric,
much.
I'm glad the public finally got to see an attorney that, okay, never mind. I'm glad you were here.
Thanks, Eric.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Care.
All right. Have a great morning, everyone.
Thank you. All right. What would you like to do? You need a 5-minute break?
Yeah, let's do a 5-minute break. Mr. Jurgensen, 5-minute break?
Be sure to thank Shay,
I will.
because I do want to see.
CSCA and leadership, the Acton Aguadulce Teachers Association leadership, our administrators, board members, really had everybody here participating to put this document together. So I just think that you should be commended as a board. You should be very proud of this document, that it's a living, breathing document. And so I'm going to kind of just walk through not just the goals you set for me, but because this is the board governance workshop and board goals, I've sort of taken the same goals and said, these are also goals for the district regardless, right? And so either way, we want these things to happen. So the first one, if you go to the next slide, falls under student achievement. And the overarching goal here is, student academic, behavioral, social, emotional success is crucial in order to graduate from our schools ready to be purposeful leaders, college, career, life. Identified, goals 1.2 and 1.3 here. We know that our teachers do regularly assess students. We know they're using their own tools. We know they're checking for understanding. And we know, of course, we have standardized, under normal circumstances, measures in place, standardized mandated testing. But we do need to, per the goals direction, think about our own internal benchmarks and think about how those are going to be aligned with the California Common Core state standards. We want those to be aligned. We want those to be done on a regular interval. And, this is something that's very important to the board for the 21-22 school year. And so we've begun discussions in cabinet and with our principals on the topic. And so I think that's something that the board can look forward to. Along the same lines is our ELD component. Just a little bit of history there. When I arrived to the district, I asked about the DLAC committee. That's the District English Language Learner Advisory Committee. And there really wasn't one. And there had been a disenfranchisement between Rachel Aguilar, who's really our ELA. She's really the only go-to person here that deals with those families on a very personal basis because we are a small district. We don't have home liaisons at each school site and that sort of thing. So, so we brought that together. We brought her back in the fold. We formed a DLAC committee. We met with them. And there's boxes that you check each year as part of that process. And so we put that into place. And I think, again, that's something that the board should be very proud of, that we've acknowledged those students. We've got the reclassification process in place for those students. We acknowledge those students and we've celebrated them. And that's extremely important. While those are some of the things that we've done, again, areas of growth here, we want also quarterly benchmarks for these students, so we're not just relying on the LPAC to come around and assess those students, once or twice a year. We want to have it on more regular intervals and make sure that we're consistent within and between grade levels with the tools we're using.
And if I may, the benchmarks are really important to do that first part of 1.3, which is the multi-tiered systems of support, MTSS. So maybe,
Yeah.
we need to focus on that too.
Absolutely.
Quick comment. I don't get all the terms. I don't understand the terms, but what seems to me to be the base thing here is, are the teachers being equipped with the tools they need to provide this increased level of benchmarking? That's where the rubber hits the road. If they are, is there cooperation there, to report these things out, or are we still struggling to grasp that in the individual classroom? That's the question. I don't need it answered here, but it's Captain Obvious.
Okay, this next piece I really think would be under 2.0. So let's just take a look at 2.4 here, providing continuous support and kind of.
Yeah, there's cameras on.
Thanks. And I can't see that word there. I don't know if you can. Thank you. Okay, to promote the use of innovative technology in order to enhance student engagement, collaboration, and learning. So I want to say that really commend the board for the professional development growth opportunities that took place in this past year, particularly given the circumstances with the pandemic and distance learning. I think an essential part of that was having a new assistant superintendent who really understands the educational component side of the house. And, I'll own it, that falls on the superintendent, but that component has been a gap. And so I know the board talked about properly staffing as one of the goals of the district in mind. So I think the board should feel very good about the fact that we have someone in place currently who understands the educational side of the house very well, curriculum and instruction, and proper alignment. And because of that, we had consistent, coherent staff development throughout this whole school year that was very advantageous to our staff. And I've been in classrooms consistently. I'm not going to read all of my notes here, but for example, these talk about Tech Tuesdays that are put on by the TOSAs. They're consistent, they're coherent, and they're comprehensive, meaning that we see 18, 19 teachers in there every Tuesday, and they're not always the same teachers, and they're not mandatory. That's 30% of our teaching staff attending PD, and we know if teachers aren't happy with PD, they're not going to give up their own time.
I was going to say the fact that they're coming back is some data to show that they're finding it useful, and I've seen a couple of things, and it seems that it's very applicable immediately. So,
yeah,
shout out to your team for that.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah,
Larry, to your point, I think that in modern education, I think the days of having a 30-student one-room schoolhouse in which the teacher is also the superintendent, I think those days are long gone. I think if you have a school district that does $1 billion worth of bond, your superintendent might suddenly be a facilities expert or development expert. If you got a district that's having some staffing issues and some organizational structure issues, you might look at a superintendent's an HR superintendent. You look at the struggling fiscal, you bring in people. And so this idea that superintendents change, I don't think that's odd. I think that you supplement your weakness with people who fit that puzzle. So yeah, it's nothing to you that you brought in someone whose focus is educational. I think that person would be equally out of place in a district that was focusing on putting $1 billion worth of schools together in 2 years. So putting the team together and the outcomes and having them measurable is what's important to me, not that everybody is really good, really not good at everything, but presents themselves as a general superintendent.
so you were actually a great segue to the area of growth for that, because the next step of this work during distance learning is that these same programs can be, they're very flexible. So you have all these different applications that teachers use now, Nearpod, Zern, the quizzes, all these different things. They're great tools, and that's what's happening on these Tuesdays, and that's what happened on Techtober, on the PD day in October, and that's what happened on the pre-service days back in August. So it's a very consistent professional growth program that's been done here, but we don't want to lose it when we return to school. So to your point, it has to be fluid, and the programming that we offer to our families and students should also be fluid. And so these programs won't go away when students come back. This is this was one of the silver linings of this very challenging year, is that teachers learned how to use, I mean, nobody really knew how to use Zoom except for a few people. So there is a silver lining in all this that I think this district, and I commend the board again, capitalized on very well during.
And I think that there have been a couple people put in position who have historic knowledge of this district internally to be kind of the wheel keepers of where that technology is going. Ms. Chun, for the perfect example, and that has all been done during a very difficult time. I think that's responsive to the district's or the board's long-term directive to make education. How is this happening? Can I put my finger on it? So congratulations for those structural changes.
Yeah, thank you.
And it's not appropriate to discuss all this without acknowledging the teachers that were forced to go into this distance learning. So I don't think it's appropriate to talk without giving a shout out to our classified and certificate staff that made all this happen, because it was rough.
And they took hits too, like, well, they're not keeping up with this school or this private school or whatnot. But I will tell you, when it was announced in March, I think it was March 13th was a Friday, and March 16th we started. Our teachers on Wednesday, March 11th, already put together PD for the teachers that would be shocked on, how do I use Zoom? What do I do? And, Google Docs, Google Classroom, Google Meets. They were very, very proactive. And they came to administration, they came to me and said, can we figure this out for 2 weeks during March so that in April it's more, coherent, consistent? Can we give them hard copies and their options? And, I mean, I think you're right.
It was, it was rough,
right. The next thing I'd like to talk about, I'm going to look at 2.0 right here, effective instruction and leadership. Specifically, the board had a goal of ensuring the district hire highly qualified individuals, specifically administrators, that we have those administrators support and that we hold them accountable. I'm going to be talking about this topic very generically, because I certainly don't want to violate anybody's rights to confidentiality, privacy, and align with our HR practices and protocols. But I want to just say that we have held people accountable. So when we talk about the turnover in staff sometimes, that without going into anything confidential, sometimes there's reasons behind the scenes that have to do with staff accountability, and an unfortunate consequence of that at times is the turnover. So, it's just, I can't, say that that's not, and in a backhanded way, it's a compliment again to the board for allowing staff to hold people accountable, because I know that you also take kind of hits for that sometimes, and we have to maintain the confidentiality, and it's difficult.
It's important I jump in here, because sometimes what I've seen, again, knowing what I know, sometimes the discussions are very difficult, but in the long term, you will find that people are moved or it goes somewhere else or somewhere, and in the end, your approach to people is human, and moving things along sometimes is a better fit for people in the really long term, and it opens doors to motivation and personal growth. That has been my experience.
Thank you. And I just made a note here. It's not uncommon for districts to overlook performance issues because it's easier. It's easier to push things under the carpet, wait till people retire, wait them out, and we haven't done that. And I just again think the board should be commended for supporting that. In terms of areas of growth, the biggest piece here is I think it's important that we do listen to the staff. When we're looking at like filling a vacancy at a site, for example, I think the process that we used to fill the vacancy for the Vasquez High School principal was critical. One of the things that I did, and it was very difficult at that time, as you recall, is I met with classified staff, and then I met with the certificated staff. And I had butcher paper up, and we took notes on what they valued as far as interpersonal skills and technical skills. What are they looking for in their next site leader? And I think that's a critical part of the process that we need to maintain anytime we're going out to to fill a site level administrative position. Because then we know, we bring that information, as we did with the high school principal, to the panelists on the interview panel. So everybody's looking at this profile of a principal for that position. And they know what qualities and characteristics that the site is interested in. Engagement 3.0. I think we've talked about this a number of times today, so I'll just touch on it real quickly, is our strategic plan. And so the biggest piece here that I think I want to just note is we have a long-term plan. We continually refer back to it. I'll even say at the last board meeting, as tough as it was, I was really excited when the school counselor referred to the strategic plan. It made for some really, valid arguments in my mind as to the mental wellness of our students, the importance of mental wellness for our students, because of her ability to articulate it in a clear, respectful, professional way, and referring to this document. I mean, that tells you that this document is something that you created that's a breathing document and people refer to it. But as far as an area of growth in that area, I think the biggest thing there is the board pointed out is we want to refer back to that. So we want to come back to that and use it as a metric and a measurable for how the district's performing overall in the various areas. The next piece is 4.0 under student safety and connectedness. We do have two issues that I say, were highlighted here: chronic absenteeism and suspension rates. So absenteeism, particularly in a small town where you have 250 square miles of coverage in the Acton-Agua Dulce area, is a challenge. It's very easy to keep your child home. It's why a lot of people do homeschooling and find other avenues for education, but this is something that we need to campaign once we're back in session and we return to school for the next school year, so that really students have that carrot out there to come to school. There's quarterly things we can do for campaigning, trimesters and so on, to really motivate our students. And there's phone calls that we can make. We can have a strategic plan where, there's the teacher check in, and it's not, I got you, like, how come you're not in school? But hey, we're concerned about you. Have a follow-up from the office staff, second call. Hey, I know you've been out the last couple of days. Is everything okay? How's your child feeling? Anything we can do? Those things will be, critical in helping to deal with that piece.
Larry, what I would be interested in knowing, I'm not sure there's a way to do it, is there are people streaming out of here because some people have lost their jobs, some people can't afford this, some people are renters, some people are living with parents now. The same type of stuff was happening in 2011, 2013. What I would be interested in to this point is, are people who are historically physically absent, are those people now showing up online more frequently than they would have been in the seat? And is offering a virtual program like we're doing now? Some of these kids are coming back, they're still streaming for the ones, Tammy enjoys that. Has there been an improvement through the virtual environment of those kids who are physically not showing up at school? I'd be interested in knowing that, because we tend to look at, the big numbers going up or down, but not able to isolate what the individual pie pieces are looking like.
So it's like we set this up, but we didn't. But yes, so the data is at Meadowlark, it's 93%. I was going into that right now. And then the middle school is 97% attendance online. And then at the high school, it's 99%. So compare that to the 15% of chronic absenteeism under in-person instruction that came from the California dashboard in 2018. It's a stark difference. So to your point, yes, that tells me people are looking for that flexibility and program offering for their students. And the fact that on our parent survey, we got a pretty good return, 192 for our K-6 parent survey. 75% want their child back in school, but 25% want to continue with the distance learning. So there are some different needs out there, and admittingly the data is skewed, right? Because in-person isn't a fair comparison to the distance learning piece, but I still think it's valuable, to your point.
Well, it's also though they've logged in.
Well, that's why.
So
it's
it is skewed data.
Yeah,
So
it
I
is
just want to
skewed.
point that out there before we went, I mean, it's great, but let's remember that if they're logging in and how long they stay versus
Is there a
staying
way
in
to check
school
their
all day.
grading? Is there a way to check their grading?
No, you just
The
take
big
a chance
skew in
to
the
stay
data
logged on.
goes when you jump from 1,000 kids to 900 kids. Don't forget about that skew.
Yeah.
I'm interested in the 100 that left. If they're moving in with mommy in Kentucky or someplace because they have to, that's a very different story than I just can't get my kid to school and I need another way to do it. We need the number, and then you have to have the number before you can effectively educate. Educating zero is worthless.
This is good numbers, but it's important to remember.
No, it's definitely, to Kelly's point, the validity and reliability certainly doesn't make it a good comparison because the criteria for being here in school right now is, yeah, you've checked in.
Yeah, but it's still great that they're checking in.
It is.
Yeah.
Perhaps someday the software will be a little smarter and
Yeah.
there has to be some keystrokes every couple of minutes.
Yeah.
But anyway.
Last piece here, if we can go to the last slide here, utilization of fiscal capital. So on November 19th of 2020, I did an overview of our fiscal status, the state of the district financially. And that was with the intent, again, of trying, even though we've been saying it for a while, to really be explicit that we're gonna have to make reductions. I was trying to really be as clear as I could without naming positions at that point, that the majority of the cost savings will have to come from people. It makes up 70 to 80% of our budget. And the only way we're gonna offset the loss we realized out of the hearing, the civil case we're involved in, the litigation, which we knew at that time I couldn't go deeply into, but I did allude to it, speak to it, is to make those reductions, which we did. So as difficult as it's all been, I again commend the board for your support in this whole entire process of finding those reductions in cost savings. That could not have been done without that kind of board support.
I was just, you should be, I think it's important to be clear that what you're talking about, the loss is the fact that we're not allowed to continue to collect excess charter revenue over expenses.
Correct. Thank you. Thank you for clarifying.
And to a point that if it exceeds 1%, you're paying for it yourself out of your general fund. But the point you're making, the Valiant, we didn't renew them at the end. They decided not to even submit. We didn't continue to collect money off of them when they were out of business and their owner is under federal investigation. But at the end of it, it was listed out. As a superintendent, I think it's very difficult to say we have this budget piece, and meanwhile, then David was putting money back into funds to anticipate these payouts. I mean, that's not something you wave a flag out, but it was on the board to anybody that was attending the meetings and could look at it and say that. But at the end of the day, if you're a superintendent and you've being told that you're going to be called in for a grand jury indictment and all those things, there's a fine line between saying, I'm going to stop everything right now. I'm going to lay everybody off right now in anticipation of, I don't know what's going to happen. I will point out that somebody was smart enough to put the anticipated payout for that payout that's coming that will be identified very soon to the public in a fund, so that wouldn't be impacting the budget right now. The budget has been informed on a lot of different things over the last couple of years that we knew were coming. But it would have been grossly irresponsible to just start laying off people and rat holding money just because we thought we knew what was coming. The inevitable was coming. We already know that. So anyway, good job on that. Good job on being fiscally conservative. Good job on everybody has their projects they want to happen. We put those away, and the reserve was kept for this day coming. So thank you.
And thank you. And the board's fiscally conservative approach to dealing with that whole value piece, as you know, worked out as well as could be expected also. So we had enough, what you call a rat hole, funds in there to cover.
I think it spoke to the judge highly about what our current practice was and our intent was too. I think the ruling could have been much, much more severe. I noticed that you were not named in a criminal case like other district people elsewhere.
Correct. Correct. The only other thing under the fiscal piece was ASB is something that the board has as a goal to continue the practice of oversight, proper oversight for our ASB folks. And we've got them all trained. I'm proud to say everybody's either been through FCMAT or CASBO training, which is the California School Board Association organization. And FCMAT is the Fiscal Crisis Management Team. So they're both good entities to use with fiscal oversight and responsibility, and our folks have been properly trained. Christie White and Associates, as you know, did a presentation. They had no significant findings. They said there was a couple receipts where the receipts weren't attached. There was a couple expenditures where the receipts were not attached, but that, you know, they're doing deep digs right now, and they said they would be because of prior years. That's their job. So that was huge kudos to the board and making sure that remains a high priority, and we'll continue to do that. So thank you. That concludes, unless you have questions or thoughts on that.
Anyone have any questions or comments?
Nothing.
Nothing. Okay.
Dennis, any thoughts?
No, I just, you know, I think this is what this clarity piece we talked earlier about is just taking time. This is a mid-year, so later in mid-year to just review where you are. And one of the things that the board did is you set some clear expectations for the superintendent. He's talked about that. And it would be good at the end of the year, and could be more of a closed session where you get a more in-depth review, sort of summary of some of the things that you really said were important. And you've had that conversation. I know Mr. King is ready to do that. But that's what quality boards do. Deal with these issues publicly like you're doing, and you also have issues where you say these are very specific things that are tied to your performance. It's not negative at all. It's a positive. I would also just share with you that sometimes people forget, I'm looking from a different lens, the years and years and years the students have benefited because of the fiscal condition that you were in. Because at that point in time, you could make some of those decisions. And so there have been, I don't know, maybe decades of things that have happened here the students have benefited from that they haven't in other districts. Now, times change, and you're making the adjustments that you have to make. A couple other comments. The loss of students, I'm dealing with a number of districts that don't know. They honestly don't know what life is going to be like, how many students are going to actually show up on day one when there's actually students who you're doing in-person instruction. So that's a big unknown, and for districts, they're in this quandary on that. So that's a very real conversation that boards are having. The other piece is, and I heard you say this, is what do you learn in terms of virtual learning that's really good that you want to keep for going forward? You know, many of these students are going to say, hey, this was really good. Parts of it were good. And so are there some combinations? And that'll draw kids in too. You know, they don't always have to be there. So I think you're asking those right kinds of questions. And the other question that I often hear boards mention is what did our kids lose in terms of learning? You don't know that now, but there's going to have to be some assessment of saying, were there some pieces there that were lost as a result of all of it? But I just don't really have much more to say other than I think you're doing everything that good boards do. You talk about the things that you need to do and work together, and you deal with these important issues like the gold standard. And Ken, you mentioned some of those are pieces there, but they come to life, don't they, when Larry starts to say specifically.
Every board meeting, every action, every voting item. And just because you're not over there, hey, the number is there. You can see it in the agendas.
So thank you for the opportunity to...
Thank you, and thank you for giving up your Saturday for us. We appreciate it. It's always good to see you.
I so much appreciate you're very toned down in what your experience is and your ability to deal with the exact same problem, sometimes at a much, much higher level with a lot more people, and you're always so positive and encouraging to have people participate. Thank you, Dennis. You are a true professional.
Well, thank you so much. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, any last minute questions or comments?
Could we hear something from Miss Elizabeth? Does Miss Elizabeth have anything she wants to tell us?
Hey, Elizabeth, can you hear us?
She might have stepped out. She might have stepped out. Maybe she's someone who's been.
Ask her to single. You're going to be us. You're going to party with us.
Come on.
It was really good talking to you.
Oh, she was.
Good afternoon.
Hello.
Hello, Elizabeth.
Good afternoon.
Okay. So I hope you had time and.
Thank you. We didn't mean to put you on the spot. Thank you.
Hey, Elizabeth, since you're there now, I'll just share. So the Association of California School Administrators partners and stuff with each other. I got partnered up with a coach my first 2 years. I shared that with you once, and that coach visited here once, John Porter, you know John, and a long-time retired superintendent. John calls me periodically and says, will you partner up with somebody interested in being a superintendent at some point? So I got partnered up with Miss Elizabeth Pratt, and we connected right away. We've been working together for a short time, just a couple months now, but we plan on maintaining this for the next year, and if she's interested, a year after that. So that's our connection.
Thank you very much.
Let her talk.
Would you like to? You can share if you'd like to share, Elizabeth. Please feel free.
Good afternoon. I'm so sorry. I apologize. I wasn't sure if I was supposed to be speaking or not. So I just wanted to thank you so much for this opportunity to allow me to sit in. I certainly have learned a lot this morning and this afternoon, and just want to say thank you for you being so gracious to allow me this opportunity.
Thank you, Elizabeth.
Okay, if there's no further comments, then we'll go ahead and just remind everyone that we have a board meeting this coming Thursday at 6:30, and then again on March 25th. So with that, I'd like to get a motion to adjourn.
Mike Fox, so moved. Chad Wadsworth, seconds.
1 second.
Paul Graff, aye.
Mike Fox, aye. Chad Wadsworth, aye. Tim Jordan, aye.
And Kelly Jensen, aye. So we're going to adjourn at 12:57 p.m. Thank you, everyone.
Thanks to the
So that wraps up the workshop. It was divided up into 3 parts. The first part being a little bit of team building, getting to know each other on the school board. The second part was charter management, governance, what they can and cannot approve or look for in an approval of a petition. And they did not get to oversight. They ran out of time. That really is a driving question within the community, oversight, because that really is where they have the most liability as a district sponsoring a charter. But they may be able to talk about that in the future. And then the third part was gold standard criteria, things that they've implemented and plan to implement. And that wrapped up the whole workshop. Mr. Falsgraf did touch upon briefly towards the end here a little bit about the Valiant Charter School case in San Diego, which is going to be a big money drain for the district, so to speak, if indeed the district has to pay out. I believe they said something close to $2.4 million at one board meeting that was a possible payout to settle in the case. But it's not clear why we're paying that or if we're going to pay that, if that's part of what the deficit is. He mentioned something very briefly about things will be identified soon to the public in respect to that. So maybe he means the payout and why we're doing it, or something to the Valiant case. So maybe in a future board meeting, we'll know more about that. And so that was it. Thank you very much for tuning in.